On this episode of Ask an Artist, we have the man, the myth, and the legend himself, Mr. Ryan Connolly. Many of us would credit Ryan for our interest in filmmaking because of his work on the Film Riot YouTube channel over the years. It's been running for 12 years, actually, and has amassed over 1.8 million subscribers on YouTube. If you don't already subscribe to the Film Riot YouTube channel, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. You can find them down below or at actionvfx.com/podcast. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Hey everybody, Luke Thompson from ActionVFX here with another episode of Ask an Artist. I'm extremely excited about this episode. I'm joined today by my co-host and our founder and CEO at ActionVFX, Rodolphe Pierre-Louis, otherwise known as Ro, and the filmmaking legend icon that is Ryan Connolly of Film Riot. What's up, guys?
Hey man, how's it going?
What up?
Yo, super excited for this episode. So let's jump right in. Let's get to it.
Sure.
So as you guys know, this show is still very centered around specific questions for specific artists. So Ryan, first up, congrats on 1,000 episodes and 12 years of Film Riot. That's an insane achievement as far as like consistency, endurance, persistence, and I really just want to unpack that more. But first up, just congrats on that because that's huge.
Thanks, man. I keep saying it's like hard to wrap my head around those numbers. Like it's just so weird. And even, Ro, you brought it up a minute ago. It's like we started in Florida, and it feels like we've done Film Riot so much longer in Florida than we did in Texas. But we've done it in Texas 3 times longer than we did it in Florida. So it's such a weird mind F for me. It's just like, and there's more than 1,000 episodes. Really, it's just 1,000 episodes of like the main Film Riot episodes, but we used to do like Film Riot Mondays where it was like the whole mail sack thing and different shorts or different one-off things that we didn't really count as official. So it's more than that, and it's just weird.
Man, yeah, that is huge. And even like anyone that has tried to do any level of like artistic work, production, whatever, over long periods of time, like that's just such a testament to a lot of different things. So definitely a lot of respect for that. So our main question today is kind of going to be wrapped around that. And the question is, how do you find inspiration as a consistent content creator? So I know there's a lot of different directions we can go with that, but really having that longevity over time. I guess first up, when you started, did you think you'd be going for 12 years? Was it more short term? Like what was your thinking when you kind of got everything rolling?
I was definitely thinking long term. Like we did a 1,000 episode, and in that episode, I talked about how like it was funny because when it first started, like I didn't know what to do. Like I knew where I wanted to go. Like once I had the idea for the show, this idea of having something that would hopefully follow me to reaching the end goal. And even then I thought, in 5 years when I make my feature, 12 years later, but, I thought, 5-10 years from now, like how cool would it be if I'm able to achieve those goals? Or really it was never, an if in my mind back then. It was like, when I get there, it's going to happen. Yeah. Same now, it's going to happen eventually. But it was always like, how cool would that be to, track that? And it kind of turned out to exactly, what I hoped. And in some, obviously, I would have loved to have been able to make my feature 5 years ago, but I haven't. And I don't mind that so much for what it does for the community, for the young kid, watching the thing, because they come into it and you can go back all the way to 2009 and see how, terrible we were, how green we were, and then watch that progression grow. And then, if we're able to make a feature in the next year or two, even, that's 13, 14 years of me banging my head against the wall, only publicly, let alone what I did before that. Whereas, you have the David Sandbergs, the Dan Trachtenbergs, where they came out of nowhere, it felt like, and boom, they're making their feature, and it feels like an overnight thing. But you don't see the 10, 12, 13 years of banging their head against the wall before that. So I really like that there is this public, like, consistent, 24/7 attempt, for that young filmmaker to look at and see, this is a long haul, man. Like if that's your dream, if that's what you want to do, buckle up, so I really love that factor of it. And that was, a part of my thought process when we started the show of doing that and keeping it going. But again, I thought maybe 5 years, 6 years, something like that. But then, I was, my thinking was the show could continue on after that, be behind the scenes like had never been done before, and be really integrated into the making of a film, and pull back the curtain in ways that we haven't seen before. We've seen a little bit of that now thanks to people like Peter Jackson, but that was kind of the idea. So it was always an idea of that longevity. I just didn't know how to get there. Like, I just knew well, there's a stepping stone right there. I'll start with that one and then see what's next. And it was kind of just winging it and figuring it out and having a plan, and that plan, going up in flames out of, being naive and then making a new one. And so the long-term idea was always there. It was just like, how the hell do I get to it?
Yeah.
Now that's really cool because, I am actually a bit surprised every once in a while when I go and watch a film art episode. Like the other day, I was watching the episode you guys did, like for the zombies in Army of the Dead,
right,
and stuff. And it's like the thing I always just think of is, I don't think I ever pictured way back then that 12 years later, you guys would still literally be that consistent with it, because it almost felt like, eventually he's just going to go do something way more interesting than, giving us people like a, peek into, the whole process and stuff. But it's just been, it's been great to be able to, still to this day. And you guys are so much better than you were, way back in 2009, and still consistently doing it. I do have some more question on that later on, but just how you even manage it all, it's been impressive from the outside.
Man. Yeah. And I mean, a part of that consistency comes from the community itself, and curiosity. It's like every episode is like, that'd be fun, and that's always been a factor of it. I mean, there's definitely times where, because now for the past 3 years I've been pitching quite a bit, and that sucks up a lot of my time. And then we have our store, and we have I have another show called Variant Comics underneath my banner, and you guys know, you run a company. There's a lot of crap that goes on that has nothing to do with anything anyone sees publicly, but that ends up taking up 80% of your time if you're lucky, so there's all those little bits and bobs you have to do. So there's definitely times where it gets super stressful and it's hard to maintain the fun of it. But, even in those times, every episode, no matter how stressful it is, there are the moments where it's like, that'd be cool, So that's a lot of fun. But then there's the community that kind of drives us, because every time we feel like, God, I'm getting winded, you get a comment that says like, you're more of a film school to me than my actual film school. Or, we did put the 1,000th episode up. We almost didn't do it that way, because it's like, nobody cares. Like, who cares? Let's just do a normal episode and we'll mention it and move on. But Ryan Thompson is our VFX artist, and he's incredible. And he's only been with us for, it's like 4 years now. So he's a little more fresh, a little, and he watched Film Right before. So he's got a little bit more of a, a finger on the pulse of how people feel about the show or think. So we'll like divert to him, often. He's like, no, we should definitely do it this way. It'll be really cool. Yeah. Even if it's just for us to celebrate our birthday, essentially, and we're like, all right, yes, let's just do it. And the response has been so encouraging and uplifting. And just a real reminder and a very like focused example of what has kept us going 12 years. And that really is like, it sounds like, a pitch or a thing, but it really is like the community, like people coming and supporting in the ways that they support, or, saying how like, hey, I'm doing this professionally now. One of the comments, there's a few of them that are like that. And the ones that blow my mind the most are the people who said like one kid said he was in first grade. He remembers binge watching Film Riot, and that was his, oh, wait, I could be a filmmaker? And that just hit me with a, holy God, because mine was Jurassic Park. Like, Jurassic Park was like, wait a minute, somebody made this, That was my... And he said what I said about Jurassic, and that's just such a mind, like, I'm sorry, what? Something we made, so cool. Did that for someone. One person said they changed their career path, their major, because they found Film Riot, and they were like, oh, I could do that. And so the fact that the show, like a goofy show that does like turbulent displays dance, the fact that the fact that can do that for people has really been like the main driving force to like keep this thing going. And, you know, I discovered like sort of a passion for that. Like, you know, I mean, I guess teaching, but we've never thought of it as teaching. We've always thought of it as like just revealing what we just figured out, you know. That's why I always say, like, in the beginning it was the want to be a filmmaker, so do I, let's figure it out, because I don't know. But here's what I just figured out, and here, hopefully it helps you, you know. So it's that stuff that really has, you know, kept our endurance up, I think.
That's great. Yeah, and I think it is also extremely impressive, because I think back to when I first started watching, I mean, yeah, it was probably 2010, 2011. I started freelance videography and filmmaking when I was 15. And so I had a lot of questions, obviously, you know, just being like thrown into the fire. And man, your content, even then, I mean, yeah, it's improved, but like it was exactly what I needed at the time for like to bridge the gap between all the really practical stuff. Like, I need to figure out a lighting setup, or I need to, you know, and like real world application, I think, is where, I mean, your content has just really filled that gap and just continuing to bring value to that community. Because you mentioned all the people that like left comments, but how many people didn't leave comments, you know, as far as like reach and impact. And like, I think that's also something worth considering too, is like, you're only hearing what you're hearing. But that's awesome, man. That is definitely legacy level things, just pouring into people and being able to add value to people and their careers. Like, I don't think there's anything better than that. And there's always going to be comments whenever we upload a video or tutorial that are hilarious. It's like, you suck.
Yeah. Well, even on our 1,000th episode, there was like 2 that I read. One was 1,000 episodes later, and they still haven't made anything cinematic. And I'm like, oh, ow, God. And then another one was like 1,000 episodes. Who cares? What's the point? And I'm like, well, anyway. You're always gonna have those. That's is what it is.
We should do like a collaborative.
Oh yeah, like the Jimmy Kimmel thing.
Yeah. We'll do a Film Riot ActionVFX collaboration where we read
totally.
Our main
Justin Robinson, who used to work with the show, and now he's actually coming back. He'll be back full time next week, which I'm super excited about. On one of his short films, he always talks about his favorite comment, which was, "This looks like it was shot for a turkey sandwich." So we'll just bring it up every now and again when like we're doing something like real sloppy, like we have to get it like this is like super DIY. We'll be like, yeah, we're shooting this one for a turkey sandwich.
That's awesome. So in that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of like creative input. You mentioned figuring things out and then showing what you figured out. I think that resonates a lot with users because it's helpful. But in kind of that constant grind of innovating, where are kind of like the stresses that are introduced with that? Like, has there ever been a point throughout that 12 years where you're just really feeling like, whether that's creative burnout or anything else, and kind of like you're having to feed this machine that is, you know, the audience, YouTube channel, whatever, but maybe you haven't been feeling like it or feeling innovative? Like, have any of those moments?
Sure, you know, there's those ups and downs, and you got to like pay attention to your mental health. And one of the difficulties for me was my vice is kind of filmmaking work. You know, I can definitely be an obsessive workaholic and obsessive about filmmaking, and in like an unhealthy way. And my wife has done a good job of like slapping me out of that and being like, you know, I say it almost on every podcast I do, but she's the one that came up with the line of, you know, when you're 80, you're not going to miss the movies you didn't make. You're going to miss the time you missed with your family. And she's kind of been refocusing me of like, chill out. It'll be there tomorrow. You know, have a life too. Yeah. So that's kind of been one of the main ones for me more than anything else. But there is definitely creative burnout that has come now and again. But interestingly, I've found that the creative burnout that I've had was like one time, like I was hitting such a wall, like the worst burnout I ever had, and I like broke, and I'm like, screw it, we're going on a 2-week vacation, we're going to California. And I just like booked this more expensive than I should have vacation, and we just bailed and sat on a beach for 2 weeks essentially. And it was nice, and it was just, you know, restful and refreshing. It was great to just be with her, and at the time my daughter, now I have a son too. And then we come back and
Nice.
I feel a little better, but I'm still feeling that thing. And then we started a project and all of a sudden it went away. And what I realized was I hadn't really done a project for me in a while. And it was a very simple project. It was something, we did in collaboration with Adobe. Ended up being this a short, but really it was this action sequence called Sentinel. But it was something I got to create. I created backstory. I created who the character was. It, in my mind, it tied into Proximity, which is another short I did, which ended up tying into Ballistic, which I always like to keep all that tight to the chest. But it's like it's in there if you really pay attention. Yeah. I love that stuff. So, I got to build out this story, and then I'm constructing the sequence with no shot list and no script. I'm kind of just making it up all on the fly. So I'm flexing those filmmaker muscles, and that just centered me again and refocused me. And I, that what I thought was burnout was just not having done, creativity, filmmaking in that way in too long of a period of time. But there definitely is, times with Film Riot where it's like, give me a minute, and it's usually when there's just so much going on at once. And it's tough because it is weekly, and we would love to do, stuff that would, we focus on one episode a month and put that out, but that's not really a possible thing. So, I would say, one of the most frustrating things is because it's weekly and because we're such a small team still, it's remained that way since day one. It's we're never firing on all cylinders. We're firing on like a fraction, like 10% of what we could be firing on. And so it's like, it's never quite what we want it to be. It's never, quite what we would want to do. And, and it's difficult to even have stuff like, okay, at the end of the year, we're going to do something really cool. But then that means that we have to add that project into the weekly projects we're doing and have it going behind the scenes while, you know what I mean? So it's still, it's still adding weights to the bar, so it's that can be difficult and frustrating of like, we want to do more, cooler, bigger, more polished. So that can definitely be, something stressful and frustrating creatively, I think.
That's really cool that you mentioned the fact that sometimes you get burnt out, but the solution is not necessarily rest. Because that's usually the thing, right? It's like, oh, you're working too much, so you need to start resting now. But sometimes, at least for me, what I found is I don't actually need to do less stuff. I need to do more of the stuff that actually matters, like the stuff that really does fuel me. Because, and it's like, especially with running a creative business like ActionVFX, obviously there's a lot of film, visual effects involved in that, but of course they're still running a business and doing everything else. And what I find is that sometimes I can literally go all week working insane amount of hours in a project that I love, and it's like the more I do it, the more energy I get out of it. And then some other times, if you're working on something that you're just not that passionate about, naturally, like, I don't know, paperwork and
it's it's the difference between doing the work where you keep being like, is it 6 yet? And doing the work where you're like, it's 8? When did that happen? Sometimes I even do, I'll even do like, I do some music and, photography, I'm in 3D now, which I mean, that lines up with everything that we're doing and whatnot, but it's new and it's a new avenue of creativity. So sometimes it's even like, shifting, I'm going to do music today, and just you shift, into a new creative outlet that's fulfilling. So that stuff definitely helps as well. Like, my brain goes in like 1,000 different directions. So when I allow that and entertain that of like, I'll go down this lane and this lane and this lane, and I, get all those little pieces, that kind of makes me feel well-rounded and rested as well, as like adding those, those functions of me that don't always get attention,
Yeah. So over that 12 years, would you say that like, I mean, obviously technology has changed. 12 years is a long time. However, that pertains to maybe the visual effects component, but it doesn't necessarily have to end there. How have you kind of seen technology kind of interlace with your storytelling for your films and your projects? Has that increased, given more opportunities? Do you feel like it bogs things down?
More opportunities, for sure.
On that?
Things have come like that was a part of the 1,000 episode too. Is like I started thinking back on like, I think we talked about it in the episode actually, but it made me think about the laptop I started the show on, and it was this terrible garbage bag laptop, and just the key, because I did my stand-ups on green screen, and it was like this background I pulled from Action Essentials or whatever it was from Andrew. It was definitely an Andrew thing, and I put that in the background. And then it was just keying. It was like not this huge seat. It was just keying the thing. And it would be 16 to 20 hours every time. So I'd have to hit, and then I would have to pray that it didn't crash, you know? So it was crazy. And then even when I got my MacBook, it was like still 4 to 6 hours to render an episode just so I could cut my stand-up parts, let alone everything else. So that's done, and now I can't do any VFX because I'm waiting for that to do its thing. Yeah. So just the speed alone, and you guys know, back in the day when you try to do any kind of visual effect, you're like, I have no idea what this looks like. Let it render out so I can look and see if this is garbage or not. You know, now I'm looking like.
Mm-hmm. And then it's like,
totally.
crap, I didn't even toggle it to be
you have things like, Unreal Engine, and you jump in, and this real time, especially with UE5, like this crazy real time thing that I'm just roaming around. And, with After Effects, with half the stuff we do now, it's, it's not fully real time, but you're seeing the end result within seconds, not like multiple minutes, So, just the speed at which you're able to create really unlocks things because you had that a little more at the higher end, but on the lower end, that wasn't there. So now you have all these cost effective options. And not only that, like, if we would have taken the technology we had now and go back to 2009, when I lost all my gear, I just would have shot the show on my iPhone, I just would have shot what was in my pocket, but instead that wasn't possible. So I had to use this really terrible, straight up home video camera. And that we did show in the episode. And it just looks so bad. And there's nothing we could do about it. I didn't have any money. I left my job, which is where I was getting gear from. So this is what we have. But now I would just shoot it on the iPhone and it would look great. Like,
that's great.
I've cut iPhone footage in with Alexa and no one knew. With Blackmagic cameras, no one knew. Of course, you have to finesse, and it has to be the right. It's not like you could do that at any given time. Of course not. Yeah. But the fact that it could in any scenario, that's nuts. So just for that, the availability
that's insane.
Of quality to realize the concept you have has come such an insane, places like you guys, that has these assets that are just incredible that you could pull and leverage to do almost anything you want, all the free stuff that's out there. Artlist, you get on Artlist and then boom, any music or music bed, and you have the subscription service to any. When we started Film Riot, we had to do APM music, and that is not cheap. Like, that is expensive. So to do that, and the only reason we were able to do it is because we were with Revision 3, but it was something like $10,000 to $20,000 a year, so that wasn't, a weight we could carry, but because we were Revision 3, we had access. Whereas now you do Artlist, and it's like $200-$300 a year, and you have all this music that you could just, grab and go. And then just the communities that are out there now for the free assets, a lot of it's personal use and not creative use, but when you're first starting out, that's what you need. And there's just so much access to and knowledge. Like, learning C4D is the first time that I've learned something in this new environment where I really didn't know anything about it. Like, I knew very little about 3D until now. So I got a taste of what it was like to enter into this thing and be so confused. But unlike in 2008, 2009, and before, everything's one Google away. Like, no matter how confusing the thing is that I'm trying to figure out, 2 minutes max, and I'm learning it from someone, and not just someone who has like work that's like, whoa, it's just crazy. So from the free education that's out there to the type of cameras you can get at the type of price, like the 6K Pro is like, what, it's under 2,000, isn't it? Or it's in the 2,000 range. That's nuts. The camera I started the show on was nowhere near as good, and that was a $12,000 camera. That's it's mind blowing. I think there are like some negatives to it
Yeah.
of like, you know, when something's made too easy, you don't try as hard, sort of thing. So I am appreciative that I started with VCRs and VHS tape. You know, when I was really young, I was shooting on you know VHS tape, and I was trying to make all my cuts in camera, and then I would go VCR to VCR and connect a CD Discman into the second one to add my music in. So everything was really, really difficult, and so everything was really precious. And
That's amazing.
you really had to think things through, and it taught me like pacing and construction in a way that was very, very disciplined, and I appreciate, and really wrap my head around DIY thinking. And because I would like listen to a track, like, okay, I'm going to do it to this track from Speed, you know, and I would listen to the song over and over and over and over, and I would just play the scene out in my mind and listen to it over and over. And then I would go film it with that tempo in my head. So then in the end, after I did that for so long, the scene would actually, even though every time I stopped and started the camera, that was my cut point, the pacing would start lining up with the actual song, like just perfectly. And so that really instilled like this like internal tempo and pace that I didn't understand at the time, but that was teaching me how to pace a scene. Whereas otherwise, you have all the time in the world. You do whatever you want. You roll as long as you want. And then you have these shots and you watch these new filmmakers and you're like, for God's sakes, please cut. It's time to cut, you know? So there are, there are downfalls, but you know, I think there's far more positives, you know, than anything else, especially the access to online mentors to hear, you know, concepts that I had to go to film school for. There literally was no way to find any of that out, you know, when I went to film school. That's why I went to film school. If I, you know, if I was that age now, I wouldn't go to film school. I would just, you know, go online and make things. Because that was very much my thing. Because I went to Full Sail. It was this year-long, I specifically went there because it was this year-long technical school. I just needed to know where the buttons were. Like, what in the hell is ISO? Like, someone please explain this to me, you know? So that's the only reason I even went, because I wanted to learn the techniques, the technical sides of things, and then come out and figure out how to tell my stories. So now I would just learn that online, you know? So it's pretty exciting and just mind-blowing. Just in the short amount of time, you know, that Film Riot has been a relatively short amount. I guess it's not a short amount of time. Feels like it, but I guess it's not. The time that Film Riot's been on, like, how much has changed. It's just crazy.
That's great. I love the parallels that I'm seeing to, like, knowing Ro and origin stories. Ro, what equipment did you shoot on? Maybe slightly upgraded from a VHS, but
it's like when you were talking about actually editing something on the tape directly, that kind of took me back to my first short film that I did. I think I was 11 at the time, and so I was living back in Haiti at the time, and basically the whole short film was edited by hitting pause and then getting another angle and then getting it. And then I remember that I would show it to people, and I guess the illusion worked so well that they were like, wait, I thought you only had one camera. Like, how am I seeing these things? And that was like the early stages of, aha.
Got him.
like we're getting you. And then I had a T2i at the start of the DSLR revolution, which I remember I was freelancing a lot at the time, and whenever I would be hired for a gig, I remember going out of my way to add as much gear, unnecessary gear, on top of that thing, because I'm like, this is obviously just a small little DSLR, and most people are like, why is this guy filming with this? So it's just been great to just see the progression of everything.
Yeah, and the acceptance of those things. Like, now you can just show up with like a DSLR, and people are like, oh, cool, okay.
Yeah, like they get it now, but at first it was just like, wait,
gotta roll
video, not photos.
That's not film. What are you doing?
And when Ro and I first met, you know, we were kind of talking about old camera equipment and all that kind of stuff. And I had a T4i at the time, and I remember being so immensely jealous of his footage that he pulled from a T2i, because like it was ridiculous.
Oh
he
my
had,
God,
I think it was
I
like
remember
a
that.
jailbroken magic lantern something.
Yeah.
So it has like some type of log stuff, but you gotta like delve the dark interwebs before you can do it, and then it may break your camera. So, but he had taken the effort to just like really, really push that thing as far as he could. And so it's probably been like maybe in the past couple years, I've rewatched one of the music videos he shot, and I was just pissed.
You bastard!
It's like I'm generally very happy, and I want to see people succeed,
but not when it's better than me. Damn it!
Knowing the tech differences between a T2i and a T4i, and what I was able to get out of it, I was just like, okay, so there's whatever. There's. I'm happy
thank
for
you so
man.
much, man. That makes me feel so good. One question I wanted to ask you, Ryan, is obviously the plan for you is still to do features. Like that's still the thing. And I've always been very entrepreneurial by nature, and knowing you, I would say you are too. In a lot of ways, I guess my question is, you technically really could just go make something right now, right? Like you really could. Like, what's your thought process? Like, what's your vision for your first feature and what you're trying to accomplish from just bootstrapping everything and just say, let's just make something and it'll be done.
Right. Yeah. There's different versions of a feature, right? There's the version that you could make for $200,000. There's a version you can make for 1 or 2 million. And then, there's beyond that. Then there's the independent financing versus with a studio. Mm-hmm. And I've always been very conscious of where I was at, what I needed, what I needed to grow to what I wanted to be, where I wanted to be, the fact that we're very much in the public eye, so it's like I've been very aware that I don't have the luxury to make a really shitty first feature. You know what I mean? and in the most part, with most people, you're going to make your first feature. And if you make it on your own and you make it for very little money and you don't understand how the industry works and you don't understand how this long format works, you're figuring it out. That's okay. You made a feature and that's probably going to get you work. If we do that, you know what I mean? It's a little bit of a different beast there. I was very conscious of that aspect of it, but also conscious of when I make my first feature, and I've always said this on the show, even like when I look someone in the eyes and say, hey, bet on me. I'm saying it with earnest. Like I'm telling you, you can bet on me. 100% you can. Is every film like a definite? No. Could it fall apart? Of course. It could fall apart for the greatest filmmakers we know. That's just for film. But I wanted to get myself to the point to where I could confidently tell you, like, hand me a couple million. It's fine. We got this. Don't worry about it. So there's that aspect of it too. And I've always been very conscious also about, if we're going to make something for $500,000, I'm asking for a lot of favors. Ballistic was that. There Comes a Knocking was that. So I'm asking these people who deserve a whole lot to come and do this for a whole little, and so I've been very conscious of that. And they absolutely would have, 5 years ago, all these people that I collaborate, they would have. But I didn't feel like that I could deliver the level of pride that they needed to feel at the end result yet. By myself. So that was another thing that was in my mind. So, as long as I could feed the demon of love and film with the short films, with what we did on Film Riot, that's okay. Let me keep going. Let me keep getting these notches in my belt to where I can sit across the table for someone and be like, no, write the check. We're good. It's time. But then there's the studio route. And you have people who are holding your hand through that process. And not only that, now you're just talking about a different level. Now you're talking about the scalability of that thing, who's involved. And the past 3 years of pitching, Ballistic happened. A bunch of production companies reached out, ended up getting my managers at 3 Arts. And, they've helped me develop stories. I've been dealing with, production companies, developing some stuff there. And the amount that I've learned over the past 3 years is more than I learned, in the previous 13. It's just crazy. When you work with that level of people, with that level of understanding on long format storytelling, which is very different from short format storytelling, what's needed even as far as conveying your vision, because, I also come from a place of DIY, doing it myself, figuring it out. No, just trust me. Let's go. Can't really do that, with a feature, so learning to convey my vision in a very concise, understandable, and grabbing way, which is very much pitching. So now, we're at a place where a few things are developing. and Hollywood's frustrating. It's a bunch of maybes and no's and maybes that turn into no's and try another thing. And, and then things that are like, is this happening or is this not happening? Like, what's happening? Is anybody going to say anything? 3 months later, still haven't gotten an answer. Okay, I guess so.
Yeah.
But, I'm always adding something else to the fire. Like, here's a new idea. Let's send this to some people. Here's a new one. But I'm also, I've never stopped pursuing my plan B, which is like, screw it, I'm just doing it myself. So it's never, I was never for a second like, oh sweet, I have managers, I'm talking to some production companies, that's 100% of my focus and nothing else. No, on the side I'm also like, all right, what other ideas am I cultivating that could be 2 or below, even in the 100,000 range? Like that way, when I hit the point where I'm like, okay, enough is enough and everything's ready, all ducks are in a row, push the button, then we have these things, and also the network to be able to do that. These producers that I've been able to become friends with, and writers, and all that different stuff. So all that has been happening in the background as well, just sort of trying to get all ducks in a row. So when I fully feel like, yes, not only can I do it, but this project, I need to do this project, and we actually can feasibly do this project. So that's kind of been, my thinking and where I've been headed, and all along the way doing those short films and stuff that not only extend my knowledge and, extend my reach and extend my understanding and network, but also, feed that demon of like, okay, I'm happy again for 6 months, but it's getting pretty close to, if something doesn't move, I'm going to be like, okay, enough. Time to go do the thing. But because I waited until now, and because I was able to get the managers and do the pitching that I did, that really opened the door to be able to do it on my own at the scale and level and understanding that I wanted to be able to do it. Because the last 3 years brought in some like much needed puzzle pieces of network to be able to be like, hey man, here's what I have. Here's the resources we have. This is the budget we're able to bring in. Can we get this in the hands of this actor or actress?
That's great.
Are you down to come in as producer? Hey, can you talk to this distributor? Show them this. All those avenues are there now. So if it does hit that point, those things are then possible. Who knows? Maybe it doesn't even happen that way. Maybe the first thing we do is a free to watch feature film for YouTube. Like, who knows? But it's all been headed in that direction, and it's all been like, stay very objective about where I'm at, where we're at, what we can accomplish, and what's going to be the most benefit to where when I make this thing, that's just going to launch to the next one and not brick wall us,
No, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for answering that and giving us a good idea like on your mindset. And yeah, that totally makes sense, because for someone like you, and especially watching your recent short films,
don't make me more stressed.
The expectation is definitely very high, and maybe people would be a lot less forgiving.
Yeah, totally.
No pressure. Don't blow this one, Ryan. I know
it's like 12 years, and it's not cinematic.
Yes, exactly.
Oof.
If it sucks, I'm unsubscribing.
So yeah, I definitely get that.
It's also Film Riot in my company, Triune, right? Like 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to do a feature and keep all that going. So it's also been like, okay, what do I do? What do I need to do for the last 5 years? And it's, my older brother, Tim, who's like my business partner, and he runs half of what the company is. And, we've talked a ton about, okay, what do we need to do to where I can just vanish and nothing changes? Like everything's fine. The shows are fine. The company's fine. What do we need to do? So we've been focusing very much on me not being needed, so I can, turn my 100% focus elsewhere. And, so Josh has been taking over Film Riot. Justin's coming back. So all these things are really like the other ducks being placed in a row. Because what I don't want to do is, push a pause button or stop button on Film Riot. I want Film Riot to keep going and hopefully follow what I'm doing with the feature. So that's been like a factor of it as well. That's kind of like I shackled myself to this thing willingly and, lovingly. I love it. But that is, a part of, the consideration as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I love to like your self-awareness when it comes to that.
Right.
Because I think it would be easy to say, okay, I have the resources or whatever, and I'm just gonna, screw it. But yeah, your self-awareness of where you're at positionally within the community, encouraging people, if you're, encouraging building up hype for 12 years and then whatever. If you're not,
and then it
proud
looks
of
like it was shot with a turkey sandwich.
shot with a turkey sandwich. I think it's really important to like, because not just for viewers, not just for the community, even though that is a part of it, but like if you get to the end of that and you haven't made something that you're proud of and that you can really like get behind, like I think that's very commendable as far as like really assessing everything before just diving in and being like, hey, sure, let's just figure it out as we go.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and a huge part of my like really getting objective was a project we tried to do called Outsiders, which fell on its face. It was going to be like this $300,000 25-minute short film. It had like 100-person zombie day. It was had all these pyrotechnics, had, you know, people that worked on Transformers involved. Like, it was crazy. And I bit off way more than I could chew. And what I learned from that the most was, one, how to put together a project of that size. I really learned how to do it on that project. But two, what I didn't know and what I needed to learn before I tried to do that again, you know. So that falling on my face was like a huge, which we tried to bring to the audience and be very open about, like, so we just failed pretty hard. I bit off more than I could chew. And instead of making a $300,000 short film, we're making a $300 short film in the middle of nowhere with just friends. So that changed, you know. But just using that stuff to educate myself and, you know, my crew, but also educate whoever's watching the show and just be dead honest of like, yeah, we messed up. And this is filmmaking. This happens. You know, why, when you're trying to figure it out.
That's great. I think it provides a lot of, just a lot of like good encouragement for people that, because they're going to get knocked down. Like, we are going to get knocked down, but not having a platform
it ain't Instagram.
That we just hop on and say, hey, everything is great 100% of the time and nothing goes wrong. And we just figure it out. It's like, no, like, so it's always trying to find a balance of like still being positive about the experience and like, what have we learned? What takeaways do we have? And not just being like a huge downer of like, wow, this is bad. Everything's bad.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of good values.
Totally. Yeah. And for me, you can't trust it when it's nothing but rainbows and sunshine. It's like, come on, man. No, it's not. Like, you're having difficulty. But you can respect like a falling on the face and getting right back up and go, you know, screw it, grab me that sledgehammer and go again, you know. and so that's what we really wanted to do and tried to do, because I say it on the show all the time, like, failure is just the bridge to success. You cannot succeed without failing. Like, you can't, if I write a script and I hand it to someone and they don't have a single note, that's great and everything, but I'm not learning anything from that experience of writing the thing, because there's nothing I can improve. You didn't give me any note. But if you come with what did work, what didn't work for you, even if you're just an audience member, what did and didn't work, that gives me something to chew on. Like, okay, why didn't it? You know, sometimes it's just not for that person, but if it is for that person, well, why didn't it connect like I wanted it to? You know, so it's like, I appreciate every tiny little failure or the massive ones like Outsiders, because that's how you get better, you know?
Yeah, no, that's great. So kind of transitioning, starting to wrap up here a little bit, like what do you have next on deck as far as like the show? I mean, obviously crossing this big milestone is huge. Any specific projects in the pipeline that you want to shout out, talk about?
Josh and I have decided to start a boy band.
Yeah,
it's
nice.
gonna be
What do you play?
Real sexy. What
do you play?
I don't. It's not instruments.
Harmonica?
It's
not instruments.
it's actually just interpretive dance.
Okay, a gentleman band.
Yeah, exactly. There's you know, like a lot of stuff we're trying to do with Film Riot. You know, messing around with Unreal Engine, like that stuff is really exciting, and talking to Hit Film about the stuff that they're doing, and with that, and we want to toy around with that a little bit on the show. And, you know, there's stuff that we're just sort of excited to, you know, like what I said earlier, like, hey, you know, it'd be cool. You know, we could try, you know, that stuff. So there's a lot of that we're going to be doing for Film Riot. Justin's coming back in a week, which we're insanely excited about. So having that, you know, dynamic back in the show is going to be super fun. So continuing to grow Film Riot in those ways. You know, there's stuff we want to do with our site. And, you know, so hopefully in the next year, you'll start seeing a lot more of that stuff, building the community out more and more engagement, with that stuff as we bring in people like Justin and other people, so we can actually do more. So it's not just me and Josh, like, oh God, we only have 10 more hours, you know, every single week, you know? And then, you know, from my career filmmaking wise, there's about 5 projects juggling around right now. I just started developing another one. There's some potential maybe comic books, which would hopefully then lead to other properties like films, things like that, which the second anything's real we'll talk about on the show for sure. But there's also that plan B that I talked about of we're getting pretty close to screw it, I'm just going to do this, So there's a few maybes, which, usually turn to no's. So I'm not holding my breath on anything, but there's a few really cool maybes that I wish I could talk about, but you know how it is. And if all those maybes turn to no's, then my 100% focus will turn to screw it, we're just going to do it ourselves. And then hopefully it'll be something like a 1-2 mil, independently financed indie feature that we just make, and Film Riot watches me sweat bullets all the way through. So hopefully that's in the stars within the next year or two. So that's really the main focus, is figuring out what's the first big project and what's the avenue for the first big project. And not only that, what's Film Riot's relationship to it? If it's a studio thing, then, they have a lot of say. They have all the say in what Film Riot does or does not do with that. So what's that going to look like if we do it ourselves? We do whatever we want. What's that going to look like? And then just Film Riot, on the norm of just continuing on, trying to do more, trying to do cooler. Yeah, that'd be fun stuff.
Awesome. That's great, man. And yeah, I really just appreciate your honesty, just being real and genuine with this episode. It's been honestly way fun. So let's say there's somebody listening or watching that doesn't know where they can find you. Obviously, Film Riot YouTube channel. Where else can people follow you, find out more about you and these projects you've got going on?
Yeah, we got filmriot.com, which has links to our podcast, the show, the films, all that stuff. And then I'm just on Twitter at Ryan_Connolly. And I think my Instagram is also Ryan_Connolly as well. So any of those places.
Nice. Awesome. Sounds great,
sure,
Ryan.
Man.
Thank you so much
it's
for
been great.
Joining us for this episode.
Appreciate
of
it,
Ask
man.
an Artist. It's been super cool.
Yeah, definitely great talking to you. And again, thank you for all the things you have done just for the film VFX community as a whole. As I said, personally, I've definitely learned a ton from you over the years, and I know just how much, you've contributed, to...
No.
I remember back in college, because I started film. Like you, I wouldn't do that again for various reasons. And I remember Todd Bruno, who used to be an actor in some of your stuff.
Awesome.
He actually, because I went to school in Florida, so he was also part of some of our student short films and stuff. And it was just cool to see that how much everyone in the class regarded him as the celebrity. That's because amazing. Everyone in the class were huge Film Riot fans. So it's the legacy has been great. And even now with all the different assets that you're doing,
thanks,
man. On
we're not you guys, but we
super
try.
Good and super helpful for a lot of people. And it's nah. But it's I do appreciate you in a way. It's hey, you're not going to just start mentioning this on this podcast, but I will mention it because you guys do have great products and great assets that people can use to do better work than they would have been able to, and we need more of that in the world. Heck, that's the whole reason ActionVFX was started to begin with.
Awesome.
So all that to say, thanks for being on this podcast. Thanks for all you do. You're great, man.
And if you ever need our help kicking down any of those doors that you mentioned, or you ever need any extra sledgehammers or flamethrowers, we've got you.
Shouldn't have said that. I'm going to start emailing you on a weekly basis. Guys, help me.
On my way. I'll send some cats driving gifts.
We just need a filmmaker bat symbol type thing that we all have that we can just turn on when we need each other.
I like
Look
it.
to the sky.
Yeah. Let's do that.
I think it's a great idea.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.